Welcome to Retirement Ramblings. I'm Scott, and today is day 107 on my countdown to retirement. So, today I met with an acquaintance of mine for lunch to discuss options, help him think through some potential investment choices for an inheritance that his wife just received. And before I go any further, I just want to say I'm not an investment advisor. I don't play one on TV, and I certainly don't play one on YouTube. So this is advice that I was just providing to him for his consideration, not something that you or anyone else should take as advice from me. So that was my disclaimer right up front. All right, moving on. So the lunch started off by him asking me about the vacation that I had just gone on with my wife to the UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Norway, and Iceland. And I told him about that and recounted the last 36 hours and my follies with British Airways getting back and getting my luggage. Then our server came over and was asking us what we wanted because we were sitting there for quite a while and hadn't ordered yet. And she was a bubbly young lady, and her name was Autumn. So he asked her some questions about her name, and then she proceeded to tell us that she hated the fall. She was born in July. She's an identical twin, and the fact that her name is Autumn has nothing to do with any of that. And since she said she was a twin, which my wife is a twin, identical twin, and so was my acquaintance's wife, I said to her, well, if you guys are identical twins and you're named Autumn, then your sister, I guess, is Summer. And she's like, actually, no, it's Sky. And I was like, I was kidding around. So I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting that to really be a name, like that her parents would, pick these names out of the air, but that's the way it was. And then we got into an extended conversation with her, and then gave her our order, and then she went away, and we proceeded to then get into the meat of our conversation. And so, as part of that conversation, I led off both just first gathering information about like what his wife's objectives are, what her risk tolerance is, just different facts that you would want to know when you're suggesting things. And then, we got into a conversation around the Vanguard Total Stock Market ETF, VTI, the S&P 500 that's represented by Vanguard's VOO, and then the Vanguard Total Bond Index represented by, BND. And so I was explaining to him specifically around VTI, the fact that it was launched in March 24th of 2001. It's returned 10.35% since inception with reinvested dividends. And then we got into the conversation of, would his wife actually take the dividends out? Would they be living on them? Or would they be reinvesting just for, something down the road? Because obviously it would have an impact on what was happening. And then I explained that the dividend in VTI varies between 1.12 and 1.23% in general, and the payout is about, give or take, 99 cents per share. And if you exclude reinvested dividends, because you want to live off the dividends, it lowers the overall return from 10.35% down to 6.27%. And then I said, if you go back and look over the time period that it's been in existence since May 24th of 2001 till now, the average inflation rate over that period was 2.35%. So backing out inflation to show what's your real rate of return over that period, with dividend reinvestments, it's 8%. Without dividend reinvestments, it's 3.92% as your actual, return, inflation adjusted. So then we talked about VOO and the fact that VTI, 80% of VTI is VOO, meaning the S&P 500. The other 20% of VTI is mid-cap, small-cap, and micro-cap stocks. So you're getting, a broad diversification across effectively the entire stock market in the U.S., if that's what you care about. And then if you look over a shorter time horizon, like the last 5 years, where large caps have basically outperformed all of the other type, mid caps, small caps, etc., then you get a different viewpoint. So I just wanted to kind of give him the different flavors of what would happen. And so, looking at that shorter 5-year time horizon from September 16th of 2020 to, excuse me, until now, right? VTI returned 13.56% over that period, and VOO returned 14.68. Then looking at inflation over that 5 years, it averaged 4.4%. Backing that out, you're getting a 9.16% real yield for VTI and a 10.28% real yield for the S&P 500 through VOO, with reinvested dividends. I didn't back out the dividends the second time. So we talked through that. Then I was explaining, like, if you want to have, if you want to add bonds into the equation and you want to look at the total bond index in the US, that would be represented by BND. And then that launched on April 3rd of 2007 and generated an average return of 3.13% since inception with reinvested dividends. And without reinvested dividends, it doesn't drop nearly as much as the stock market returns. It only drops down to 2.76% if you're going to basically take all the income that's generated by BND and use it. And so, but then when you look out again, take out inflation over it, your real rate of return over that period was 0.63%. So effectively, you parked your money, your purchasing power didn't go down. It went up very slightly, but at least, you either reduced your volatility potentially, or you got income that you were living off of. And so, if you wanted bonds in your portfolio, that was a reasonable way to do it. And then we discussed just inflation in general. And my acquaintance is 12 years older than me. So I was saying that I use calculation over my lifetime, which started in 1961. And so inflation over my lifetime averaged 3.8%. And so then I said, since I don't know what's happening with tariffs exactly, like, I make the assumption that the majority of goods that I'm purchasing are coming from somewhere in Asia. It doesn't have to be China. It could be Vietnam, Cambodia, India, whatever. So I'm using a blended 25% tariff rate as my assumption. When you do that, it effectively adds 1% onto your inflation rate. So instead of using 3.8%, for my own personal calculations, I'm using 4.8% for the foreseeable future, just to make sure that I'm accommodating for what I do think will be an elevated level of inflation when I'm doing my calculations. And so I shared that with him, so he could decide what he wants to use when he's backing out different numbers. And then, we didn't talk about the size of her inheritance other than the fact that it was significant. It was like life-changing numbers. So because he said that, and the way that he informed me of the information, part of that money was through a non-spousal IRA that she inherited, and part of the money was through other types of accounts and such that she got to step up in basis, and there wasn't any tax implications. But then I explained to him that you need to go see a tax advisor because the total amount of money that you're inheriting in a given time period could dramatically impact your IRMA calculation for Medicare, which he didn't know anything about IRMA. So I was sharing the brackets with him, explained how IRMA worked, etc. And then because a portion came from a non-spousal IRA, I explained to him that, you really have two choices. You have to take, depending on the way it was structured, how old the person was before when they passed, had they already started taking RMDs, had they not started taking RMDs, that throws some complexity into the mix. But basically, there's only two choices that happen based on how that flow works. One, you're either going to have to take RMDs and it gets added to your lifetime IRA or RMD calculations, or you have to completely wipe out the amount of money over a 10-year period so that, the government gets their taxes. So again, suggested that he go see a tax advisor to see what's the best way to handle that. Then we talked about the 2025 standard deduction. And I was explaining to him that if you're over 65, which both he and his wife are, if you're over 65 and you're married filing joint and your combined adjusted gross income is under $150,000 a year, then your standard deduction as a senior in 2025 is going to be $45,200. That's $30,000 as your standard deduction for married filing joint, $3,200 for being 65 or older, which is the normal senior additional money, and then $12,000, which is part of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that is valid for 2025 through 2028, where each person over 65, if you're under that AGI number, gets $6,000. So I was explaining to him that the first $45,200 they make, no taxes. And then, you can go from there. Then we got into a whole conversation because he's 6 years older than his wife. Like I'm 6 years younger than my wife. And so we were talking through, well, what happens when one spouse passes away? What happens to Social Security? What happens to your taxes? And I explained to him, which he didn't know, that should he predecease his wife, in addition to her losing one half the Social Security, which she'll get the step up, so she'll go from hers to his, but she'll also go from married filing joint to single. And when she does that, unless they're in the absolute top tax bracket, effectively the income she can earn drops by half, which doubles basically her taxes. So if they were in the 12% tax bracket, she'll go to the 24. Like it's a big step up when someone dies. And so a lot of people don't take that into consideration. So I was making sure, again, talk to your tax advisor as you're doing the planning. And then we talked about Roth contributions. So he's self-employed, and for whatever reason, he never set up a SEP or an IRA or a Roth in all these years. So we were talking about the fact that in his business, he could, in fact, put away $8,000 in a Roth. But I also shared with him that, be given that he's that he's already a certain age, you still have to wait 5 years before you take the money out of the Roth. So at this point in time, if he puts it in, he's thinking, you might as well think about it as a legacy thing because, you've got to wait a long time relative to how old you are to be able to take the money back out. So, but then I also said, like, if his wife doesn't currently work for him and he wants to hire her as an employee and pay her at least $8,000 a year, she too can open a Roth and put in the full $8,000 with catch-up contributions. So we talked through that. Then we talked through what you can actually hold in a brokerage account, what you can hold in a Roth, stocks, bonds, real estate, what have you. Anyway, net, we spent about 2 hours covering all these different topics. And then I promised him that when I got home, I would write up a summary of what we talked about, send it to him so that he could noodle on it, go over it with his tax advisor, go over it with anyone else that he wants to chat with, just to make sure that he absorbs the information and then makes whatever, decision he wants to make in consultation, obviously, with his wife, because it's her money, to move forward. And then while I was driving home, I checked in on my buddy who was having cataract surgery today. Surgery went well. He sent me a picture, so, with the one eye covered. So then tomorrow I'll end up taking him for his follow-up on the first eye. And then on Thursday, they'll do the other eye. And I'll take him back on Friday for his final checkup. And then I guess, you have to put drops in so many times a day or whatever for some period of duration. And I assume that he'll then have to go back after like 2 weeks or something to do a final checkup and then, make sure that they can get any prescription that he might need either for astigmatism or for whatever variants he might have in his vision. And then got home, went back, finished doing all the rest of my work that I needed to complete for the day. And then I ended up making baby back ribs with brown sugar baked beans for dinner. And here I am. So that's my update for today. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section down below or drop me an email at myretirementramblings@gmail.com. Otherwise, I hope you have a great evening, and until tomorrow, take care.